In a world where many of us take education for granted, nearly 250 million children aren't attending school. More than half these kids are in places impacted by crisis and might not make it back to a classroom. But like we saw during the pandemic, advances in education tech and AI programs for learning can help students continue to learn, but only if they can access both the tools and internet. This episode, we bring you a conversation with members of the International Rescue Committee, an aid group developing tailored learning experiences for children in crisis. It was taped before a live audience at Europe's largest tech conference, Web Summit, in Lisbon, Portugal. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in 2 U.S. cities.
As the disc rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte I present to you Electro, the Moto Man.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
Support for this podcast comes from Motific, bridging the gap between concept and deployment by accelerating deployment and helping ensure compliance throughout the process. Visit motific.ai to learn more.
Thanks for being here. My name is Sara Callies. I'm a director, I'm an actor and a writer, and I am here as an ambassador for the International Rescue Committee.
Hello, I'm Morena Baccarin. I'm an actor and an IRC ambassador.
Hi everyone, really nice to be here. I'm Atish Gonsalves. I lead education technology and AI innovation at the International Rescue Committee, and I also am the founder of an edtech startup called Gamerteca.
There may be some here who do not know what the IRC is. Sara, do you want to start us off by just explaining what the IRC does?
Absolutely. So the International Rescue Committee was founded in 1933 at the behest of Albert Einstein and others in New York, initially to get the Jews out of occupied France, and then later expanded to all vulnerable people, trying to save them from the Nazi regime. And over the years, we have grown. It's been 90 years now. We're in over 50 countries worldwide. We're one of the largest humanitarian organizations, and our goal is to get there when people need us most and stay as long as they need us.
Worldwide right now, we have, 250 million children who are out of school and not receiving an education. So, Morena, do you want to help maybe level set so that we understand the scale of this problem?
It's enormous. I've seen it firsthand. I've traveled to Colombia with IRC when, it's still happening. The Venezuelan refugee crisis was at its peak. Over 50,000 people were crossing into Colombia over the Simón Bolivar Bridge, and I stood there watching this giant influx of people coming into Colombia. And IRC had centers there where it would help people with cash assistance, with food. A lot of the people coming over, most of them were young mothers with their children, and these children had absolutely nowhere to go. And at the time that I was there, which was 2018, this program that Atish is going to talk more about wasn't in existence yet, and the kids had no way of going into the local schools in Colombia because they didn't have proper paperwork. So it became a bureaucratic nightmare for the government. So we're talking millions of children that have to stop their education. They fall behind in extreme ways, and they have nowhere to go and just be kids.
So in 2013, I was in Jordan and northern Iraq with IRC, participating in a bit of the response to the Syrian refugee crisis. And, these situations, as you point out, are just vastly emergent. We had, in Domi's camp, 3,000 to 5,000 people a day walking across the border with absolutely nothing. And, we all remember the pandemic and what it was like to have our kids out of school. This is a situation where these kids are out of school. I mean, this crisis has been going on for 10 years now, and one of the most difficult things to do was to find people who spoke Kurdish, Arabic, and English to get the books, to get the brick and mortar. That all takes time. Something like Aprendia can be deployed on a device, right? This is often delivered through WhatsApp and devices people already have. And so having seen the size of the challenge, if we stick to the traditional brick and mortar solutions, I think what's exciting is this is a very disruptive technology that allows us not only to make sure that that time between school and education is as short as possible, but it can also be tailored to children who've fallen behind and tailoring an education to bring them up to grade level, or children who are doing incredibly well and make sure that they're challenged at the current level of learning.
So there's an opportunity here for ed tech and AI to help fill this gap, and Atish has been working on some of that. If you want to tell us about some of what you're building.
I think you mentioned 250 million children affected by crisis in one way or the other, and that includes both kids who've been in more longer-term protracted crises, so think of like the Syrian crisis, which has been going for years now, or more immediate acute crises. So the impact is still quite severe. So in an acute crisis, there's a big disruption like we also had in the pandemic. In a more protracted crisis, you've got like overstretched school systems in the countries which are hosting the refugees. But the scale is massive, and this includes out-of-school children, it includes children who are in school but are still not reaching minimum, let's say, standards as well. And the current solutions which are there, so either we do try to set up schools and informal learning centers. They just take too long to set up, and we just can't address the scale of the challenge. So in terms of the solutions we are looking at, so one of the exciting solutions we're looking at is called Aprendia. So Aprend is in Latin languages is to learn, and IA is AI in Spanish as well. So that's where the name comes from. But the idea is to provide last mile education using AI, personalized learning, gamified learning. So smart in the cloud, but very simple at the point of delivery. So it can be used on WhatsApp and SMS. So reach children or reach the parents or reach the teachers on the devices, on the platforms that they already use.
I was also in Colombia, but pretty recently, and I got to see one of these tools. Atish, where else are you deployed?
IRC is in 40 or 50 countries now, and we've got education programs in most of these countries. This program we are currently piloting in about 5 countries. So it's in Colombia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, and in Jordan, and we're also starting to roll out in Afghanistan as well. And they're all very different use cases. In some cases, the solution's being used for students directly. In some cases, it's being used for supporting teachers who are very overstretched and who are managing a class size of 200 kids. So it's being used in very different countries and in very different contexts and in very different languages as well. I think that's important to stress as well.
The thing we haven't said here, and I bet people will really want to know, your personal stories for how it is you came to be working with the IRC in the first place.
Sure. I myself am an immigrant. I moved from Brazil to New York City when I was 10 years old, and I had the best possible transition. My father was working for Globo, which was a very large Brazilian news corporation, and we had visas, and it was still really difficult being in a foreign country, going to school, learning a language, learning social cues. So I can only imagine what it would be like to be fleeing a country under duress. And that connected me with the IRC, and I went to a dinner that was honoring the Brokaw family for their anthropological work, and it had examples, real refugees who came from Libya, I believe, who were these young women that got a chance to have education and became doctors in the United States. And it really connected with me that the fabric of the United States and the world is made up of people from all over the world, and that this stamp of refugee has come to mean something negative when I think these people want to work, they want to be a positive influence in society, and that's why they are fleeing where they are fleeing.
And my grandfather had sort of the opposite experience. So my grandfather was a Jewish refugee from what was then Hungary and is now Romania. Came to the United States at 8 years old, and this was 1920. There was no IRC, there weren't support. He was supporting himself and his family by selling apples on the street. It was a very difficult transition. By the time he died, he was running Fred Astaire dance studios in Chicago for Fred Astaire. So part of the narrative of my family is we went from nothing. The stories that he told were about sleeping on a dirt floor with rats running over his legs as he slept with the rest of his family, to paying his taxes and supporting the American economy. And as Morena points out, there's a very terrible PR war being waged against refugees right now, that they're scary, that they're dangerous, and that they're here to take more than they give. And the story of my family is the story of refugees everywhere, which is study after study shows when you bring refugees into your country, it elevates the economic, if you give them the ability to work, if they have legal work papers. It elevates the economy, and so I wanted to be a part of that.
Atish, coming back to you, what are some of the limitations of the current tech tools out there for doing this type of work?
So the challenges with current education technology solutions is either very gamified, very personalized to the needs of the learners, and can teach at the right level cognitively or linguistically, etc., but the requirements to deploy are quite high. So you need like quite fancy hardware and software, so you need to deploy it usually on tablets or some kind of a smartphone. And on the other side, you've got very low-tech solutions which involve sort of distributing content, sometimes through SMS, radio, but are not interactive enough. So what we've been trying to do is seeing how can you get that level of personalization and engagement, which provides serious learning gains that really helps children and helps even adults learn, but you can do it on simple devices and deliver that type of engaging interactive content on the devices and platforms that learners use. So those are sort of some of the challenges at the moment. Is there is tech, but it's very difficult to deploy in our context, or it's too simple to make it meaningful enough.
Yeah. I feel like we need to further acknowledge the digital gap here, just the challenge of getting devices and connectivity to the places where this is really needed. What are some ways we can make this more inclusive?
So to make it more inclusive, I think it's looking at what kinds of partnerships we build on the ground. So we work very much with local partners, with our country teams who lead a lot of the content creation. So it is important that these kinds of solutions aren't seen as top-down, but are very much created with communities, that we are really working with the tech companies, the telecommunication companies, and with local communities, with the teachers, to understand how also these solutions integrate into broader education systems. So what we're also not advocating for is these solutions somehow replace existing brick-and-mortar schools, but they are there to complement, and in some cases, they fill a gap when there's an immediate crisis, but it's very much to complement and include teachers as part of the education journey.
And if I may, we were talking about something yesterday. I think another potential future use of this is if you're in a situation like, for instance, Poland is currently absorbing a tremendous number of people from the Ukraine. If you're in a situation where the public school system can't absorb that many students, you can deploy something like this, which allows students to learn at home if perhaps there's a trauma response to leaving their parents and to going out into a more formal education system, and also to reduce the burden on the host countries and hopefully try and reduce some of the potential friction then between the refugee population and the host countries.
And just an example of that, so in northeast Nigeria, so these teachers who are stretched, so they're like one teacher for 200 kids, and they're dealing with kids who don't even speak the same language that they do. You've got a lot of local languages, including Hausa and Kanuri, and the schools that we've seen there, they're just really struggling. Mm-hmm. And so the schools exist, but they just can't cope. And so solutions like this can help to complement the existing systems and take some of that burden off the teachers who are already so stretched.
I think we should back up to, Sara, you mentioned COVID, and just acknowledge how much came out of that era in terms of ed tech. And I'm wondering for you, Atish, were some of the tools, some of the jumping off points, were those really created during COVID, or are these things that you've really built from scratch?
So COVID showed us what's possible. It also showed us some horrible examples of how EdTech can be badly rolled out as well. But it did show that it is possible. Teachers, parents, everyone just adapted and just rolled with it to ensure that there was some level of continuity. But there was definitely an acceleration in the EdTech space. There was definitely new sort of AI solutions also coming into the space to see how can we really adjust and personalize and adapt. So COVID has definitely pushed things forward. But I would also encourage you to read a report that UNESCO published this year called The EdTech Tragedy. So it also talks about the impact, the negative impact it's also had in some cases in keeping schools shut longer than they should have stayed, but also in some cases also increasing the learning gaps as well. So I think I think there were positives. It did show that it can sort of fill that gap left by COVID, but also I think we should see some of the challenges which also came out of it as well.
We'll be back right after this. Support for this podcast comes from OutShift. Cisco's incubation engine's newest AI innovation, Motific, is bridging the gap between concept and deployment, accelerating deployment while reducing security, trust, compliance, and cost risks. Motific provides advanced policy controls to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data and helps ensure compliance throughout the process. Visit motific.ai to learn more. This episode was produced by me and Emma Silikans and mixed by Garrett Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong. Support for this podcast comes from OutShift. Cisco's incubation engine's newest AI innovation, Motific, is bridging the gap between concept and deployment, accelerating deployment while reducing security, trust, compliance, and cost risks. Motific provides advanced policy controls to prevent unauthorized access to sensitive data and helps ensure compliance throughout the process. Visit motific.ai to learn more.